And guess what? We look forward to the podcast. It takes 1 hour a week. It's the most productive, most bang for your buck hour of the week that we spend, hands down. There's nothing else we do 1 hour a week that produces the results that this does.
So what were you doing before? Were you doing anything like content before that? Were you just writing text posts? Like, were you getting people from, I guess I would call this in the marketing realm, like organic content, so to say? Is that where you, like, what was your kind of client acquisition like, I guess, before the podcast? And then how did the podcast affect that as well? Dave, Paul, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. This is a long time coming here.
Couple of years, man. Been a couple of years. Yeah.
So we started this little series at Podcast Principles. I pivoted my podcast for like the third time. And now, we really want to like showcase more podcasters. And also the reality is, like, if you're doing this on a weekly basis, like you guys have 100 episodes, over 50,000 downloads, there is, we probably don't even know what the actual like lessons are until we get on the podcast and talk about it. Right. So, where I want to start with, and really what I want to do today, is highlight what you've done with your show, but also give some tactical and practical tips to people who would either be starting their podcast or might be just a little bit early on in the journey. So we'll start at the beginning. It's funny. I'll set the context here. I was talking to Dave on LinkedIn. Dave, you added me on LinkedIn. I messaged you, you booked the call. And then I believe like a few days later, we kind of just started working together. Like there was no crazy sequence there. But it was just the timing, right? So from your perspective though, what was your idea with this? Was there other podcasts? If you could just set the context on what the topic is, we don't have to go too deep on it. But then also really just what got you into it?
Yeah. So Paul and I had been in this business for a couple of years at that point. The business we're in is infinite banking, the infinite banking concept. If you want to check out the podcast, Wealth Warehouse podcast. But that's really all we cover is this concept and teaching people how to create their own banking system so they can get out from under the oppression of the commercial banking system and the fractional reserve banking and all of that. So it's finance heavy, financial topics, and really talking about learning how to control your own capital. That's really the crux of what we do. But Paul and I have, we're in a small group of other IBC practitioners, Infinite Banking Concept, IBC. So we do a lot of mentoring and getting mentored by other people who've been in this business for a much longer time than us. And a few of them have podcasts. And I think Paul and I, we were out on a hunting trip in South Dakota together with a group of a couple other dudes in this business. Actually several, which are all great guys, a lot of fun to hang out with. But this was 2022, right? No, 2021.
I was going to say, I don't even know.
Yeah.
It was the fall of 21.
2021.
Yeah, the fall of 21. And we were just, hanging around, having a drink, talking. And one of the guys who has a podcast on this concept already, we told him, hey, we're thinking about doing this. And he said, you can't start a podcast soon enough. And we're like, wow, this is coming from a guy who's been in this business for 30 years, had a podcast for a number of years. He had over maybe 100 episodes by that point, maybe more. And he was saying, half of his business comes from the podcast. So We thought, wow, we can do one podcast a week. As long as we stay consistent, let's see what this does. Let's just give it a try and see how it goes. So we started exploring that, and you were already a connection on LinkedIn, I think. And I thought, wow, this guy seems young and hungry. He's active like me daily. So reach out to him. Let's have a conversation.
So what were you doing before? Were you doing anything like content before that? Were you just writing text posts? Like, were you getting people from, I guess I would call this in the marketing realm, like organic content, so to say? Is that where you, like, what was your kind of client acquisition like, I guess, before the podcast? And then how did the podcast affect that as well?
Man, and Paul, you can speak to this too on your side of the business. But the way I built my business was my warm network. It was contacting friends, family, holding webinars, something like that, sending people a book to read. Like
Yep.
Paul was my first client. I sent him a book to read. He called me and said, "Let's do this." And then he became a licensed agent as well and started his own business doing this. But it was it was that really pounding the pavement, in the 21st century sense of pounding the pavement. I'm not
Yep.
walking door to door, but virtually going door to door and having conversations with people. And then I got on LinkedIn and I just committed to doing one post a day, just original content every single day. I did that for about 2 years and
Nice.
made some good connections. But yeah, it was just talking to people. I did not do a lot of content though, other than that LinkedIn post every day.
Yeah, I would say my experience was very similar. Warm market, friends, not really family. I would say just friends only, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time around the right people, so I was able to grow a business around this concept fairly quickly, um, and turned out to be a blessing. Um, so yeah, very 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 similar experience, just organic growth through who I already knew.
So, Paul, did you envision yourself being a podcaster when you started IBC, or?
No, not really. I mean, I definitely enjoyed soaking up content from our friend James, and Ryan, who have a very good podcast on infinite banking concept, and but not really. But I think I knew in the back of my mind. I think Dave knew too. Is eventually we were going to burn through our warm market. So I did a lot of active kind of Facebook posts about the infinite banking concept,
Yeah.
both when I was Dave's just client, because I was like, this is great. I need to tell other people about it. But then once I became an agent, that's kind of how I got the message out. And I was just sharing, hey, this is what I discovered. I read this book. I listened to this podcast, and my eyes have been opened about dividend paying whole life insurance and how it can be used as a stepping stone for financial freedom, and also a legacy from my family. So that bore a lot of fruit for me. So I knew I had to, what other I guess, what other ways can I how do I reach people? That's the idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you extend your reach so that I know this is good?
Yes.
I want to tell people about it. Like, how do I best do that? And then, sure enough, at that hunting trip, Dave's kind of the idea guy, kind of drives us in the right direction, and and it's exactly what James said. I could still hear him saying it was, you can't start a podcast quick enough, and
Man.
so we did, and we did months later. We were recording our first episode. It was Valentine's Day 2022.
Yep, that's when it dropped. So
That's when
almost
it
2 years
first came
ago.
out.
Yeah.
I think this kind of leads us to a little bit, which I won't go too far into it because it's a bigger topic. But the fact that I talked about this on another podcast with another podcaster who we work with, and so a lot of businesses just aren't that good, so they can't really even deliver on their core offer. So if you can't do that, then how can you start? How can you talk for hundreds of hours about the thing, right? So
Right.
what you just said, Paul, you guys had to know it was that good to then be like, oh my God, people just need to know about this. This will help. This is just regardless of the money, regardless of business, it's just going to help people. And I think there's a lot of businesses out there that they don't really help that many people, and they'll figure it out eventually, right? Or maybe they'll figure out what they want to do in life, right? And this is, like I said, a little bit more broad of a topic than podcasting, but I think it leads me to the fact that there is knowing the thing, there's doing the thing, there's teaching the thing, and then there's teaching it on a podcast. And those are kind of all different things.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ryan. I don't think there's no way we could host a podcast on a subject or a topic that, one, we weren't intimately involved with in our personal lives, our personal finances, right? We both pay very high premium and, multiple dividend paying whole life insurance policies. But, it's a labor of love too. Like there's a
Yeah.
commitment, and you're not going to be committed to something you don't believe in. We,
Yep.
live, eat, and breathe the infinite banking concept. And that's the only reason it works, because there's passion behind it. And we look forward, Dave and I are very good friends as well. Right. And we trust each other as business partners. And so it all kind of works together. But yeah, if what you're trying to sell, and again, I would say this, we're not selling anything. It sells itself.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, we teach. We're educators, and I think the podcast is is so it serves so many different purposes. One, it basically Paul and I were talking every week anyway. We're like, well, why don't we just carry this conversation onto Zoom, hit record, and then publish it, and it's out there permanently, And then the biggest thing this did for me was like until I had my own content, and Paul had his own content in this podcast. What were we doing to educate people? We were sending them to somebody else's content.
Right.
And I had this experience before where I sent somebody to somebody else's content and they ended up doing business with that person. And I was like, well, this is messed up, man. Like, I'm the one that introduced you to this. Like, come back to me. But, it was my own fault. I sent them to that content because I didn't have my own. Now we have our own content, 100 episodes. Basically, any question somebody has for us, I can point them to an episode and say, hey, here's the short answer. For the long answer, the 30-minute answer, go check out this episode. And man, it's a time saver. It's something that our clients can pass on to their network, so they don't have to be the expert on explaining this concept to their friends. They can just say, go listen to these guys. And I've had multiple people contact me, even guys I went to college with over 20 years ago, I haven't talked to in 20 years. They contact me and they're like, Dave, one of my buddies out here told me about this podcast. I started listening and I recognized the voice. And, so he heard about it from some random dude that I don't even know. So in Germany. So
Wow.
it's, yeah, I mean, the way that it spreads and just having your own content you can point people to instead of having to direct them to somebody else's is huge for credibility, marketability, and just organic growth of your business.
Such a good point. Yeah, I would say the way I always put that is your prospects are watching somebody, might as well be watching you. Because, like if there's finite amounts of time, right? It's that car ride is only 25 minutes a day, or even if it's 2 hours a day, but you can't listen to all the podcasts even in your commute, right? So you then have to choose. And so if you then choose, even without you sending them to somebody else's podcast like you do back in the day, even now they're just choosing out of a few options that pop up on Spotify. And if yours isn't there, then it's impossible. So yeah, it's like before you have a podcast, it is impossible for people to reach that level within your brand. Like it's impossible for people to learn from you, really. Yeah. Nobody's reading a blog on the treadmill.
Right. And I'm not about to have a 2-hour conversation with somebody to answer a single question. Like that's not a good use of my time, too. Right?
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the format, right? Because you guys have a co-hosted, you guys are both hosts, right? There is a little bit of which I really love this. I think the co-host is the new interview show. I think you guys were a little bit before the trend, to be honest. It's kind of trending a bit more now, just from what I'm seeing. But how does that work? Like, it could be the logistics of splitting up some of the work, or it could be just having the other person, Dave will interview Paul a little bit, Paul will interview Dave a little bit, and you guys will also just have an ongoing conversation. But, what is can you talk just a little bit about the format and kind of choosing the co-hosted rather than a solo or even an interview?
I would find it extremely difficult, one, to develop content every week and think about it. Again, it's a lot. It's a huge level of dedication to do a podcast every week, even just one episode. It's it takes thought. It's not something that is done in a willy-nilly fashion. And Dave and I feed off each other, right? we have very similar views of the world, if not identical. I mean, probably, let's face it, it's identical,
Pretty much.
which is good. Yeah, which is good, folks. But and then, I might forget to say something. This happens to every podcaster or any radio host or news anchor or something. You're in the middle of a thought, and all of a sudden, and maybe I'm just, I'm 44 now, I'm just getting old, but all of a sudden, the point I wanted to drive home, it happened this morning on our last call that we just had. I just blank out. But Dave will say something. He'll either fill it in for me or I'll fill it in for him. And then there's our complete thought, and it works.
It's like we finish each other's sentences, which we actually do at the end of every single episode, right? So
that's right. True. Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
it's true.
I'd say two things: accountability. Like if I try to do this on my own, there's no way in hell I would have done 100 straight weeks. Just it's not possible. It wouldn't happen because life gets in the way. But if you got somebody else who's holding you accountable, you're holding them accountable. It's going to get done. I mean, and we're never more than one episode ahead of the game. Like we've never got anything in the queue except one episode. So Paul and I meet every single week, usually the same time, same day every week. Sometimes we have to flex for one reason or another, but somehow or another, it gets done. It's so funny how if you make a commitment to something, put it on the calendar, it gets done, even though there's so many other things on the to-do list that just don't. But, yeah, if I was doing this on my own, there's no way I'd do 100 straight weeks. And then the consistency, being consistent with this. And I think the best way to be consistent is have a partner who's pushing you and you're pushing them to be consistent and make it happen.
Yeah. And I think I said it before, but we enjoy it.
We're going to talk anyway. We might as well record it.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a day that goes by probably over the last couple of years, or, not too many days that Dave and I haven't at least texted with each other or emailed each other or spoken on the phone. And that's just, so for our particular situation, it works incredibly, incredibly well.
And it helps you hone your craft.
Yep.
Like, I was thinking when I was in high school, Larry the Cable Guy, if you know that dude, right?
Oh yeah.
Classic. He was kind of getting started back when I was in high school in the late 90s. I would listen to this radio show every morning on the way to high school, and they would call Larry the Cable Guy every morning. And Larry would have something ready to go. But I remember seeing an interview with him saying he was forced every single day to come up with new material because he had that going on tomorrow morning. He was going to get on a radio show and had to have new material. So it helped him hone his craft. I think it's done this for us where, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, answer any question, any objection, just naturally without even thinking about it anymore. So,
right.
It really is it's the power of that constraint. Like constraints allow you to do the thing. Like it's not, if you were to completely, I'm the same way. Like I do weekly episodes as well, but if I didn't have the editors who we're going to talk about in a second, same editors that you guys use at Principles, those guys need me to be ahead a couple weeks, and that helps me to be ahead a week or two, where I'm like, and now once I'm ahead a couple weeks, I'm like, I wonder if I could be ahead 4 weeks. And, but even just the fact of having other people involved, even if it's your partner or your co-host or your editor, even if it's just a freelance editor and it's just your cousin's friend or something, just having a person having an expectation that something's going to be delivered and you telling them that that's going to happen, you totally have to do it. It's essentially psychology, human psychology / the car guy asking you to, forcing you to say yes to 3 things. And then, you buy the car. You can do it on yourself, to an extent. That leads me perfectly to, working with podcast principles. Like I said, we literally just had a 30-minute call, guys. Like we're the same. You know how we roll. I've never hard sold anybody. I've been doing this for 5 years. Like on anything, I just asked, is this what you want? And people say yes or no, So, in terms of that, how has that experience been with having other people involved, having us produce the show? I'm going to assume even between, I edit some video, but even between both of you guys, have you had to get in the weeds in the editing too. It's like, oh, that would be another thing, another reason why the episode couldn't come out that week or something.
Oh my goodness. So I recently finished a book last year called Who Not How. And, of course, I didn't read it before we started working together, but now looking back, we knew that we needed help doing this. There's no way, we both have Mac computers, which are super powerful and awesome, but I am not a editing video creative dude. I pointy clicky and open email, send email, watch video, whatever, do Zoom calls or something. That's what the extent of what, my talent with regard to computers is. But, so I would say if folks are looking to start one, they need to find someone like you, Ryan. I mean, I thought your process was fantastic. And I know you've probably further refined it.
I was going to say, you guys should see it.
Yeah, you were still building it.
I was, I need to send you some recordings or something. But anyway, Jack is really sorry to cut you off, Paul, but he's been taking the lead on the coaching now, because I have to run, I do the sales and marketing, and he's doing most of that. So yeah, it's a day in and day out. Every single day we're making new resources and refining.
Yep. This podcast that we have, Wealth Warehouse, would not exist without help.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Who Not How, you're not kidding. Because when we started exploring this idea, I started looking into, reading these articles, these blogs and YouTube videos on making a podcast is easy. Here's how to produce your own podcast. And then I watched that and I'm like, are you kidding me? There's no way I'm going to do all that. I might get through 3 episodes and then say, I'm done with this.
Easy compared to what?
Compared to what?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And then I look at my, what's your hourly rate? Right? Every business owner should understand what their hourly rate is. Take how much money you want to make in a year, divide by 2,080, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. That comes out to your hourly rate. Yep. If your hourly rate is $400 an hour, why would you be doing video editing when you could pay somebody else a much lower rate to do that for you? And guess what? We look forward to the podcast. It takes 1 hour a week. It's the most productive, most bang for your buck hour of the week that we spend, hands down. There's nothing else we do 1 hour a week that produces the results that this does.
Right. And let's face it, I don't want to do what your team does and what you guys do. I don't want to do that, because I would be crappy at it. And and again, to Dave's point, we don't have the time to do it. So I can't stress enough, who, not how. Yeah. You're the who's, your team is the who's, and I let you guys work. And it's for us, right? We don't have to worry about it. The podcast appears on YouTube, all the platforms, podcast on Apple, on and I have no idea how that happens. Yeah.
And I don't care.
Every Monday morning, and I don't care. It's wonderful. It's magically there. And I can tell people that, right? I'm on YouTube, I'm on here, I'm on there. Any Audible, it's everywhere.
Yep.
And I don't care how it happens.
YouTube Music now soon, guys. By the way, Google Podcast is over, so that's a little podcast tidbit. Google Podcast is done, and now it's going to be on YouTube.
That was a thing?
I was going to say, I don't know who uses YouTube Music either, but anyway, it's there. But I would be remiss if I didn't, first of all, shout out the team, but specifically Jack too. He manages all that. He makes sure all that happens, right? So, yeah.
Jack is solid.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jack.
Rock solid, man. But it literally is who, not how. It's all of it. This entire ecosystem is you guys as the people recording, then us as the team breaking it and managing it, or breaking it down, managing it. Jack then sending that to all the individual people who need to do the edits. Then him coming back and sending it, then that going out to the audience, then the audience responding, reacting, and consuming. And then from that feedback, you guys creating another episode. And it's just this cycle that keeps going. And like you said, it's the most productive because it's a perfect circle. It's a circle. It's not a start and then an end. And I was just talking to Dave about this before. Episode 1 of Wealth Warehouse, your podcast, has gotten 25 downloads in the last 30 days. People are chronologically going through. So that work that we do, that's the beauty of the podcast too. It doesn't end. It actually consistently, it's literally, it's, not to use the term, but it really is infinite in that way.
Yeah, it's
It
one
doesn't,
and
there's
done.
unlimited amount of people who could consume it, but just because you put it out 100 weeks ago doesn't mean it's not being consumed. So it's also evergreen and it lives forever, essentially.
That's right.
Which is kind of a crazy thought too.
And that's great for our business, is that everything we talk about is evergreen, because it's surrounding principles that don't change, like the laws of nature. Like, these are the laws of money, and these principles don't change. So they're going to be just as relevant a decade from now as they were 10 years ago. So that's another great part. If you have a business that, you're on the cutting edge and it's all, current affairs driven or something like that, then the episode you did a year ago is probably no longer relevant. But there's still a need for it and a use for it today, even if it's just, only relevant for the next couple of weeks or something.
So
right. That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you guys think about that in the beginning too, in terms of, I know we literally went through it, us four, in designing this podcast, but I believe, because I know it's been a little while now, I think that was a point that you guys made, or you set out to do, essentially, right? It's like, let's start where we can start, right? It's what's the name of episode 1? The debtor, the wealth creator,
I think it's
the debtor, the saver, the wealth creator, or is that episode 1?
No, number 1 is like,
that's
isn't
just
that
an
when we
introduction.
introduction?
Yeah, who are we and why you should care? But I believe,
and why do you care?
Yeah.
Yep.
What was episode 2? I'm not sure.
Well, I've got it right here. Episode 2 is the saver, debtor, and wealth creator.
Okay.
So the first real episode. Yeah,
Yes.
you were right.
Yeah. So and then 3 is Paul's favorite, sweaty wads of dripping wet cash.
I was going to say, we got to make sure that's a plug to you guys. We will have all the links for everybody watching and listening to this, all the links down below. I'll make sure to say that because we are mentioning a few episodes, but in that lens, right? Listen, you hired some help. You have the who down, you have the team, you have the strategy, right? I think that is important too. You guys didn't just jump in and make an episode and then figure out how to release it. You hired you hired the help, and then also the help on the other end to do the production side. Do you have any tips for somebody who is maybe similar to you guys in a niche business? I would say a niche that, is expanding, and maybe is just going through that in their head of, maybe they don't have that friend who says you can't make the podcast fast enough. Maybe they just have an idea. Do you have any sort of advice for somebody who hasn't yet started their podcast in maybe something that's a little bit more niche?
Yeah, I'd say, one of the things most business owners look at, one of the first things is, how much is this going to cost? Not just in money, but in time. I would challenge people to think of, how much is it going to cost if you don't do it?
Yep.
So there's an opportunity cost for doing something and for not doing something. And Paul and I talk about opportunity cost all the time when it comes to your money. But it comes to your time too, and the decisions you make in your business. What's the cost of doing this, but what's the cost of not doing it? That, and then get a partner, do it with somebody else. Like, don't try to go it alone. He and we're both military guys, highly disciplined. We don't need anybody to tell us what to do. We do it on our own. But I know for a fact I would not have done this for 100 straight weeks if I didn't have somebody else to do this with.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add to that, but if you've got something to tell people that's worth telling, and that's something that you believe in, like I said in the beginning, what better way than to spread your message than through, you want to extend your reach. How do you best do that? So is it a podcast? Yeah, it very well may be. I understand there's a lot of them. You can find a podcast on almost any topic. I mean, I'm listening to a podcast right now on intermittent fasting.
But most of them don't last past 5 episodes, 10 episodes? I don't know.
Yeah, what is the average?
I was going to say, I could drop some stats here real quick. So, I mean, it's 70% of podcasts fail is the term. That's the term that I use. But what does that mean in reality? I think it's around episode 8. There's no concrete data, by the way. You can look at 10 different sites. One of them will say episode 5. The next one will say episode 10. Let's just call it 8 and put it in the middle. In a multi-year span, like you guys, right? Your show, 2, 3, 4 years. I'd say 90% of podcasts are probably just not recording anymore. And I'll add my example. When I pivoted my show, I used to interview rappers from New Jersey. That was my podcast, right? Now I have a different audience. I have a bigger audience on LinkedIn for essentially these style podcasts. So I looked it up. Who has the Ryan Sullivan Show? It's a very common name. It's got to be taken. This guy hasn't released an episode since September. So I go on namecheap.com. I buy both the domains that he didn't buy, ryansullivan.com or the Ryan Sullivan Show and Ryan Sullivan Show. So now I own the domains, and I go and rebrand and I make the Ryan Sullivan Show, right? It's like, because who knows what happened in his life, but hey, I'll take it from here, right? So it's a very, to use a financial term, volatile. It's not volatile for the person. It's just means that there's so much coming and going. There's so many people stopping and starting. So yeah, that's what I create all my content around. If you want to look up Pat Flynn or, any of these big podcast guys, they'll teach you how to start 1 in 3 steps. What I'm concerned with is why do they fail and how to make them not fail. And how to make them not fail, in my opinion, is to do what you guys did, is create it around something that you can talk for hours about and never get bored of, but do it in a strategic way so that you can make it sustainable and do it every week.
Well, real quick, don't quit after the first month because you don't get any business from it.
Truth.
Like, I think it probably took us.
Mic drop right there, Dave.
Yeah, I don't know how many months, Paul. I'm thinking maybe 5 or 6.
I was going to say about 6. I was going to bring that point up too, Dave, was, we weren't sure, right? Nothing's a sure thing. So, but it was, we justified starting this and the expense to start it through, we're not marketing anyway. Let's consider this our marketing budget for 2022, the year we started. And let's just, we're going to talk to each other anyway. Let's, record it, get the content out there. It's out there forever. And let's just see how it goes. I think we had some decision points along the way, and then, it starts slow. Yeah. But then, gosh, it was, we were talking, I remember talking about, well, maybe we'll get a client that it'll pay for the podcast for the year or something or whatever. And, many times over now. So
Right.
Are we lucky? Are we good? I don't know. Probably a little bit of both, but certainly
that's another metric.
Worthwhile.
Another metric you could calculate: how many clients would it take to pay for this service, right? And for us, I mean, it could easily be one client. One good client pays for the full year, and then some. And now we get clients consistently, prospects consistently. They'll become clients, and then they start sharing. And what's cool is our clients are probably the most loyal listeners, because we're giving them more information. We're bringing our clients along. So now it's a better client experience, because they'll send us a question. I'll say, you know what? Paul and I are going to talk about that on our next recording. Thanks for the idea. We're going to do a recording. Stand by. You'll get the answer in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And there they go.
And I would say, Ryan, that, for people looking to start a podcast for whatever they're trying to do, is that, our case, it's, I guess, in the sales realm, right? So the listeners that become clients are ideal clients. They take very little effort on our part to further educate, because they've listened to episodes 1 through 50 or 1 through 100 now, whatever. And they just have some, they have some clarification questions or mechanical questions or something on how stuff works. But by and large, they are low maintenance, ready to rock. And which is great. That's who we want, right? I'm not here to sell anything. Dave's not here to sell anything. We're here to educate, but they come to us educated. But so it's, for us, it's been a blessing.
Yeah. We're also not here to spend a whole bunch of time trying to teach somebody something who schedules time with us, right? Because if you book a meeting with me on my calendar, that means somebody else can't.
Yep.
So the podcast leads we get are my favorite leads, because I know that they've been educated at least up to a certain level. Yep. and they probably read the book that we always recommend every episode. And usually they start by saying, "Hey, been listening. I read the book and then I scheduled time with you." I say, "Perfect. Let's go."
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that a question? Do you have a form or something when you book a call? Does it say, "Did you read the book"?
Yes, actually,
Yeah, it should. I was gonna say it should. Yeah,
we
100%.
do. We recently incorporated that into our individual Calendly stuff,
Yeah.
so that we can. It's kind of a it's screening criteria.
Totally.
Because if you haven't read the book or listened to the podcast, there's not going to be much for us to discuss.
Right.
Yes, because they're bringing their ideas, right? They're bringing their situation in the lens of what they've already consumed from you. And
Right.
this is, yeah, sorry. Go for it.
Yeah, no, sorry, Ryan. Or they've digested, they come to us, you can always tell this, they've digested other content that I wouldn't recommend them
And
digesting
they ask
ever
you,
again.
they're asking, what do you think? He said this. And yep.
Yes, and
Yep.
I have to unwind
Yep.
all of
Yep.
that bad information that they've digested, and like, oh, this is the way.
Yep.
It's, this
Usually
video
from
has
a
1,000
30-second TikTok reel or something. Right.
Yeah. 100%.
And then, yeah. Right.
It's all right. We'll make sure yours are not like that. We'll make sure yours, if we end up going that direction.
One thing you helped us with, Ryan, early on. I remember we did some after action reviews on the first couple of episodes. Because I remember being nervous.
Yeah,
I was going to say,
that red light. And
there's a learning curve. There's no doubt. Comfortability.
Come on, Paul. Like,
I couldn't
but now
drink
it's,
water on screen because it was shaking like this.
yeah, shake. It was, so, but I remember, you're coaching us through that and help, really gave us some just great early constructive feedback that I think we needed, and it was necessary to help kind of even focus. Focus, but even dial it in just right. And I just remember being impressed because you're a young guy still. I know you're 20 whatever, but I was just impressed.
No,
I
appreciate that.
intuition and yeah, you bet.
No, and well, that's I just talked about this on another podcast, which is for some reason people think if people give you money, you have to tell them what they want to hear, but you have to tell them what they need to hear.
That's right.
Right? Like, if you really want it to be a real relationship, if you want it to just be a yes man thing, then okay, great, that's what you're doing. But that's where that's just what I didn't see in podcasting. That's what you guys do in your business. Like, if the numbers don't work, they don't work. Right? Just because somebody is, it either works or it doesn't work. But that's what the kind of philosophy, I guess, now to fast forward from when you guys came in the program, even more so now, is just such a clear picture. And to your point about the time, yeah, like you guys took the time out to do this today. This is our podcast that we're interviewing our podcasters who do it on a daily basis. Like, again, it's really this ecosystem. But if you're starting from scratch, like, to summarize what you guys said, yes, have the team, key, have the strategy, key, have somebody that can say, hey, totally get it. It's your first time doing a few podcasts, might be a little nervous. Try this, try that. Here's some real feedback. I'm talking real feedback, that's super valuable, right? That's what you're doing for your clients. That's what every business owner should be doing for their clients, because what's the point? They could just go on ChatGPT and it can tell them what they want to hear, so.
Oh, God. Yeah,
we won't open
true.
that can of worms.
Yeah. But I think, coming off as authentic, I think has helped Dave and I a lot.
Yes.
Because
you
we're
guys are
straight shooters.
you on the podcast. You guys on the podcast are you. You're here. You guys, here. I mean, essentially.
Yeah, we joke around. We have a good time.
People appreciate learning about you a little bit. Like, we don't spend 10 minutes every episode talking about ourselves or our personal lives, but it gets sprinkled in.
Yes.
And people feel like they know you before they even.
And we suggested that too. I mean, I remember us suggesting that too. I remember. And make sure to have that banter because. Yeah, and that's another point on the, hey, if you're going to do solo, more power to you. I do it as well, so I know the difficulty in it. But just having people around, just having that initial, like, hey, how was your weekend stuff? That's how people talk. We're not creating some fictional world, right? Like, this is just when they get on the call with you, it's you. And that's what the podcast does. It allows them to get to know you without you being there physically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another benefit. Guys, any parting wisdom or thoughts for the audience before we get out of here? I mean, we hit on everything that I wanted to hit on. I'll just end with this as well. over 60,000 downloads, over 1,800 individual listeners on your podcast as well. And I know this wasn't a full deep dive into the numbers. I wanted to just make sure, I touched on your podcast experience, which is really what I'm focused in on. But, for our numbers people, it's all there. And in that closing too, let people know if they can reach out to you, how they can reach out to you. And for either of you guys, anything else you may want to say before we wrap it up?
Yeah, just check out the podcast, Wealth Warehouse, the IBC guys. But it's all about infinite banking. And there's several other podcasts we could recommend, but we'll just leave it to ours for right now because that's the place you should start anyway, right? But yeah, Obviously. If you want to get a hold of us, what is our email? David and Paul at the
IBCguys.com.
Yeah, yep. There we go.
And David and Paul at the IBCguys.com.
Yeah. The only other thing we would leave everybody with is what we say every week, control your capital.
Or somebody else will.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Keep going. Episode 100. I'll see you guys back for another one at 200. I mean,
sounds good.
Let's make it happen. For everybody listening, watching, thank you so much for tuning in today to another episode of the Ryan Sullivan Show here from Podcast Principles. And I will say what I say on every single episode, which is we are in every single platform, even the ones nobody uses. Okay. See you next week.